paycheck goes directly into his account. That was the rule from day one. Not a suggestion, not a request. A rule delivered the way he delivered everything. Flat, final, daring me to argue. I didn't argue. I was 22 and had just moved back home after my first job fell through, and my stepfather had a way of filling a room that made disagreement feel physically dangerous. Not because he'd raised his voice. He never raised his voice. He never raised his voice. He just looked at you with those pale eyes until the air got thin. So my paycheck went into his account. I got an allowance, $40 a week, and I was supposed to be grateful. My mother watched this happen and said nothing. That was the part that cut deeper than anything he ever did. She stood in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel in her hands, watching him explain the arrangement, and she folded the towel very carefully and walked back to the sink. That was her answer. That was always her answer. I had been home for 7 months when he decided I needed a curfew. 9 o'clock. I was 23 years old with a nursing certification and a curfew like a child in middle school. When I came home at 9:14 one Thursday, the bus had been late. There had been an accident on Ridgeway. Nothing I could control. He was sitting in the living room with the lights off. Just sitting there in the dark, waiting. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "You think the rules don't apply to you." I told him the bus was late. I showed him the transit alert on my phone. He took the phone from my hand, looked at it, set it face down on the coffee table. "I don't care about the bus," he said. That was the May I understood what kind of person he was. Not the kind who needed a reason. The kind who needed control. The bus being late was irrelevant. My being 14 minutes past 9 was the point. The point was that I had failed to perform perfect obedience, and the reason didn't matter, and no explanation would ever be sufficient, because explanations gave me agency, and agency was exactly what he was trying to remove. I started sleeping with my door locked after that. 3 months later, he installed a lock on the outside. I want you to let that sit for a moment. A lock on the outside of my bedroom door. I came home from my shift at the clinic one afternoon and found a deadbolt. A proper deadbolt, not a hook and eye, mounted on the outside of my door frame. He had done it while I was at work. My mother had been home. She had watched him drill into the wood and said nothing. "For your safety," he told me, when I stood in the hallway and stared at it. "You sleepwalk?" I've never sleepwalked in my life. I started hiding things. A change of clothes at my coworker Deja's apartment, a burner phone I bought with cash from tips, a folder of documents, my nursing license, my social security card, my birth certificate, in a waterproof bag tucked behind a loose panel in the bathroom wall that I discovered by accident when I was 16. I didn't know what I was planning. I just knew that something in me had decided it was time to start planning. The night everything broke open, I was on the phone with Deja. It was almost 8 o'clock. I'd been careful to be home by 8:30 and thought I had time. Deja was going through something with her sister, and I was listening, and somehow I didn't notice the front door open. He didn't announce himself. He just walked into my room. The lock on the outside meant nothing when he had the key and saw me on the phone, and something shifted in his face. Something I hadn't seen before. Something that scared me in a way that the pale eyes and the quiet voice and the curfew and the deadbolt had not. "Who are you talking to?" he said. Not a question. "A friend. You don't have friends." I told Deja I'd call her back. I was trying to stay calm. I'd read enough about escalation to know that calm was the thing to hold on to. Don't raise your voice. Don't make sudden movements. Give him something to feel in control of. "I'm sorry," I said. I lost track of time. "I'll make dinner." "You'll do a lot of things," he said, and moved toward me. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body made it. I was on my feet and through the door before I'd consciously processed that I was moving, and I was down the hall and into the kitchen, and he was right behind me, faster than I expected, and I grabbed the counter to change direction and knocked over a glass, and the glass shattered, and he grabbed my arm and yanked me backward, and then there was a sound I didn't understand. It took me several seconds to understand it. It was too loud to make sense of indoors. It bounced off the tile and the cabinet faces and rang through my teeth, and my arm was free, and I was on the floor, and there was pain radiating up from my left side that I couldn't locate yet, and he was standing very still, holding something, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. He was surprised. He had surprised himself. The gun was a thing I hadn't known existed. I found out later it had been in the house for years, registered to my mother, purchased before she met him. He had found it at some point and moved it somewhere she didn't know about. The way he moved everything. Quietly, without asking. I got up. I don't know how. I got up and I walked to the back door and I opened it and I walked out into the yard and he didn't follow me. I think he was too shocked by what he'd done. Or maybe he was thinking, he was always thinking. He was always thinking, calculating. I knew he would start again once the calculation was complete, so I didn't stop. I went through the yard and through the neighbor's gate and down the alley and out onto Marsh Street and I walked. I was bleeding. I knew I was bleeding. I'd done enough clinical rotations to assess myself at a distance. The pain was sharp and high on my left side, probably a graze. No organ involvement based on the location. Blood loss manageable for now, but not for long. I was wearing a gray sweater and the blood was spreading and I needed help and my phone was on my bed and the burner phone was at Deja's and I had $31 in my pocket and nothing else. It was November. It was 40 degrees. I had no coat. I kept walking because stopping was not an option. There was a gas station 4 blocks away and I thought if I could get there I could ask someone to call 911. But when I came around the corner I saw that it was closed. And I stood on the sidewalk outside a closed gas station with blood soaking through my sweater and looked at the street and tried to think. There was a park across the street. I don't know why I crossed to it. I think my body just wanted to stop moving. There was a bench near the entrance under a streetlight and I sat down because I didn't know what else to do, and I pressed my hand against my side and I looked up at the streetlight until the halation around the bulbs started to blur. I was going to pass out. I knew the signs. There was a man on the path about 20 yards away. He was walking a dog, a big golden retriever who spotted me before the man did and pulled toward me, and the man followed. I tried to call out. My voice wasn't working the way I expected. I raised my hand instead. He stopped, looked at me, looked at my side. His expression changed completely. Not panic, which surprised me, but a kind of immediate, organized urgency that I later came to recognize as the expression of someone who has seen crisis before and knows what to do in it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, held it toward me. The screen showed a notes app with a typed message. "I'm deaf. Can you type or write?" My hands were shaking. I took the phone and typed, "I've been shot. Left side. I need help. Please don't call the police yet. He's still in the house and my mother is there." He read it. His jaw tightened. He typed back, "How long ago?" I typed, "Maybe 15 minutes. He typed, "Is the bleeding slowing or getting worse?" I typed, "Slowing, I think." He nodded, took the phone back, and made a call, which I found strange since he told me he was deaf. He held the phone differently than most people, angled slightly the way someone would hold a phone to make use of a hearing loop or a caption calling service. He spoke into it briefly, then he sat down next to me on the bench, shrugged off his coat, and held it against my side with steady pressure, and he did not remove it, and he did not flinch, and he looked at me with a directness that was not alarming, but was instead the most stabilizing thing I had experienced in years. He was in his 60s, gray at his temples, a large, careful man who moved like someone accustomed to being responsible for things. I typed on his phone, "Who did you call?" He typed, "Ambulance." "And a friend. Both coming." I wanted to ask about the friend. Both coming. I wanted to ask about the friend. I didn't have the energy. I woke up in a hospital. Deja was there. She had been contacted through some chain of events I still don't fully understand. The man had looked through my wallet, which had fallen onto the path when I sat down, and found a business card with the clinic's name, and through the clinic's after-hours line had reached my emergency contact, which was Deja. This was the kind of systematic, methodical problem-solving that I would later learn was simply how he moved through the world. His name was Robert Ashby. I found out 3 days after the shooting when he came to the hospital. I found out the rest of it gradually over the following week, because he was not the kind of person who led with resume. He came every day. He brought books. He communicated through a combination of typing, lip reading, his was exceptional, and a small whiteboard he carried in a messenger bag. He was quiet in a way that felt full rather than empty. He listened the way people listen when they've spent a long time learning to pay attention to things other than sound. On the 4th day, a woman from a legal advocacy organization came to my room and explained that she had been contacted by a Dr. Robert Ashby, retired, and that the organization was prepared to provide full legal representation at no cost, and that a protective order had already been filed. Dr. Protective Order. Robert Ashby. I looked at Deja. Deja looked at me. I typed to him later, "You're a doctor?" He typed back, "Was. Trauma surgery. 31 years, mostly military hospitals. I retired from the Army 2 years ago." I stared at the screen. I typed, "What rank?" He looked at me for a moment, then typed, "Does it matter?" I typed somehow yes. He almost smiled. Typed, "Brigadier General, 1 star, not glamorous." I had been helped out of a park by a military surgeon who retired as a general and communicated through a notes app and walked his golden retriever at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday in November. His name was Robert Ashby, and he had absolutely no reason to stop for me, and he stopped anyway. My stepfather's lawyer released a statement 11 days after the shooting. Then came the other things. Someone. I would find out later who, though I still don't like saying the name, had taken photographs of my room and my documents and selectively edited them to suggest I had been planning to defraud my stepfather, to falsely claim ownership of the house, to extort money using fabricated evidence of abuse. A local blog ran the story with no verification. Then a second outlet ran it. Then the story was on social media, and strangers who had never met me were calling me a liar and a manipulator and worse things than that, and I was still in a hospital bed with a drainage tube and a police report and a very good lawyer. And I had about 4 days during which I thought the whole thing was going to collapse. I cried once during that time, just once, in the hospital bathroom at 2 in the morning, sitting on the cold floor with my back against the cabinet, because the tiles were steady and the cabinet was steady and I needed something to be steady. I pressed my hands flat against the floor and breathed until the crying stopped, and then I got up and washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I thought about all the times I had stood in my bedroom with the deadbolt locked on the outside and listened to the house go quiet and told myself that this was survivable. That I was still here. That being still here was the point. It was still the point. Robert, he'd asked me to use his first name, had a colleague, a woman named Agent DeLuca, who worked in a capacity she described only as federal oversight of civil rights violations, and he would become involved when the fabricated documents were traced back to a source with prior federal charges. Robert hadn't asked her to get involved. She had called him. Apparently they had worked together during his time at a base in Georgia, and when he'd mentioned my case to a mutual acquaintance, she'd made contact. This was how I learned that the world Robert Ashby moved through was a different world than the one I had been surviving in. Not because he had money or status, though he had both, but because he had spent 31 years building a network of people who trusted each other, and trust, in the right hands, moves faster than a local blog. The fabricated story was retracted. The outlets issued corrections. The source was identified. It was my stepfather's nephew, who had a background in basic photo editing and an extensive criminal record the blog had apparently not bothered to check. My stepfather was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and unlawful imprisonment. The outside deadbolt, as the lawyer explained cheerfully, was a significant piece of evidence in that second charge. The preliminary hearing was 3 weeks after I was discharged. I did not see my mother until 2 months after the shooting. She came to Deja's apartment where I was staying in the second bedroom, and she sat in the small kitchen with her hands folded on the table, and she looked older than I remembered. She looked like someone who had put something down that was very heavy and was now trying to figure out how to stand without it. I didn't make it easy for her. I want to be honest about that. She asked if I would listen, and I said yes, but I sat with my arms crossed and my jaw tight because the girl who'd been locked in her room had not entirely vacated my body yet. And that girl had things to say about mothers who stood in kitchen doorways and folded dish towels carefully and walked back to the sink. What my mother said, slowly, haltingly, with several long pauses, was this: she had been afraid. Not in the abstract, shapeless way that sounds like an excuse. Specifically afraid, with specific memories attached to specific incidents she described for the first time that afternoon. She had not told me because she thought, she had convinced herself, that silence was a form of protection, that if she stayed quiet and compliant, he would stay focused on her and leave me alone. That her submission was a shield she was holding up between him and me. It hadn't worked. She knew it hadn't worked. She had known for years that it wasn't working and had kept doing it anyway because the alternative, the moment when she stopped being quiet and compliant, was the moment she was most afraid of. I sat across from her in Deja's kitchen and heard all of this, and felt the anger moving through me like a current, and also felt, underneath the anger, something else. Recognition. Because I knew what it was to calculate whether movement was safe, I knew what it was to hold very still and hope that stillness was sufficient. I didn't forgive her that afternoon. That's not how forgiveness works for me. It came later in smaller pieces, over a longer time. But I didn't turn her away either. I let her sit in the kitchen, and I made coffee, and we talked for 2 hours, and at the end she hugged me in a way she hadn't since I was small, and I let her. The trial was 5 months after the shooting. I testified for 40 minutes. I had practiced with the lawyer until the timeline was clean and the details were precise and my voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't allowed to feel things, but because I decided that what I wanted to deliver on the stand was not feeling. What I wanted to deliver was fact. Clear, dated, documented, irrefutable fact. The photos of the deadbolt. The medical records. The transit logs from the bus on the night of the curfew violation. The financial records showing $400 a month siphoned from my nursing salary into his account over 18 months. He sat at the defense table and looked at me with those pale eyes. I looked back. He looked away first. I want to remember that. He looked away first. The verdict took the jury a day and a half. Guilty on all charges. Sentencing was 6 weeks later, 8 years, with the possibility of parole reviewed after 5. I was standing outside the courthouse when Robert found me. His dog was not with him. He had a case manager who walked the dog on court days, apparently, and he was wearing a suit that was very slightly too formal for a civilian courthouse, as though his body still defaulted to military occasion. He stood next to me on the courthouse steps and looked out at the street. I said, "I don't know how to thank you." He typed on his phone and showed me, "You already did. You testified." I said, "That wasn't for you." He showed me, "I know. That's the point." We stood there for a while. It was March. The air had that early spring quality of being almost warm, not quite. The sky a particular pale blue that looked like something someone had diluted. There were pigeons on the courthouse steps. There was an older couple walking a small dog of their own down the sidewalk. The city was doing what cities do. Moving, indifferent, persistent. I thought about November. The park bench. The $31. The blood spreading through gray wool. The way he had sat down next to me without hesitation and held his coat against my side, as though it were simply the next task. I thought about all the versions of that night in which no one came down that path. All the versions in which I sat on that bench until I passed out and woke up somewhere different, or didn't wake up at all. How thin the margin was, how random. A golden retriever who pulled left instead of right. Robert typed, "What happens next for you?" I had been thinking about this. The clinic had held my position. Deja and I had looked at a 2-bedroom apartment in the Glenbrook neighborhood, close to the hospital where I was thinking of applying for a position. I had spoken to 3 different people about returning to school. There was a nurse practitioner program at the state university, 2 years, competitive, and I had been told by someone whose judgment I trusted that I would be a strong candidate. I typed back, "I'm going to apply to an NP program and find an apartment and get a dog." He read it and showed me his screen, good order of priorities. I laughed. Actually laughed standing on courthouse steps in March, which was not something I had expected to do that day. I'm writing this from the apartment in Glenbrook. It's the following October. Deja lives across the hall. We tried the 2-bedroom, decided we liked having separate spaces, compromised on the same building. I have a dog. His name is Orbit, and he is a mid-sized mutt with one ear that goes up and one ear that folds over, and he has strong opinions about squirrels and no opinions about anything else. I got into the NP program. I start in January. My mother and I talk twice a week. It's not uncomplicated. It's not simple, and I don't expect it to become simple. But she's in counseling now, has been since the spring, and there are conversations we've had recently that we couldn't have had a year ago, and I think that means something. Robert sends a message every few weeks. Brief, characteristically matter-of-fact, a news article. A question about the program. Once, a photograph of his dog in a Halloween costume. The dog appeared deeply, personally offended by the costume, and I told him so, and he sent back a single line, "He hasn't forgiven me." I keep that exchange in a folder on my phone. I keep a lot of things now. Documents, records, photographs, the small proof of the life I'm building. I used to travel light because I thought lightness was safety. I understand now that it was just a different kind of loss. The crack in the wall of that November night was not an ending. I've had to remind myself of that on the days when the memory comes back in unexpected ways. The sound a door makes when someone enters a room without knocking. The particular quality of silence that means someone is listening from the other side. I've had to remind myself that I am not in that house. That the door behind me does not have a lock on the outside. That I am allowed to take up space. I didn't have to be found that night. I didn't plan for a retired trauma surgeon with a golden retriever and a notes app and 31 years of knowing what to do in a crisis to walk down that particular path. I planned the folder behind the bathroom panel. I planned the burner phone. I planned what I could. The rest of it, the bench, the streetlight, the coat pressed against my side, that was something else. Call it luck. Call it grace. Call it a man who chose, for reasons I'll never fully understand, to stop. He stopped. And I'm still here. That's the whole story, and also just the beginning of it. People ask me sometimes what I took away from all of it. They want something clean. A lesson with edges. I understand the impulse. When something terrible happens to a person, we wanted to have produced something useful, as though suffering is only acceptable if it's educational. I don't think it works that way. But I do think there are things I know now that I didn't know before, and some of them are worth saying out loud. The first is about cause and consequence, not in a mystical sense, but in the plain, observable way that actions accumulate. My stepfather made choices, small ones at first. The rule about the paycheck, the curfew, the quiet intimidation. Each one went unanswered. Not because I was weak, I was surviving, which is different, but because I didn't yet understand that every time a boundary is crossed without consequence, the person crossing it learns that it isn't a boundary at all. He kept going because nothing stopped him. And then, one November night, something stopped him. Not a feeling, not a lesson. Evidence, documentation. A lawyer who knew what a deadbolt on the outside of a door meant in a courtroom. The thing that stopped him was the accumulated weight of what he had done, presented clearly to people with the authority to act on it. Cause and consequence. It just took longer than it should have. The second thing I know is about intelligence. Not the kind measured in test scores, but the kind that shows up in a crisis. Robert didn't save me because he was a general or a surgeon. He saved me because he paid attention. He saw a woman on a bench and assessed the situation before he reacted. He communicated clearly under pressure. He made one call for the ambulance and one call for a person he trusted, and then he sat down and held pressure against my side and didn't leave. That's not luck. That's the result of a lifetime of training himself to see clearly and act without panic. Intelligence, in the way I mean it, is a practice. It's what you do with what you notice. The third thing is about what it actually takes to keep going. Not motivation. I find motivation is a fair-weather friend, shows up when things are already going reasonably well. What I mean is something quieter. The ability to get up off a cold bathroom floor at 2 in the morning and wash your face and look at yourself in the mirror and decide, again, to still be here. I did that more times than I can count during those months. I didn't do it because I was brave. I did it because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was something I refused to give him. Deja kept my documents safe. My mother eventually told the truth. Robert stopped on a path in the dark. None of them had to do what they did. They chose it, and I think the choices people make when they have no obligation to make them, those are the ones that matter most. Those are the ones that hold a life together when everything else is pulling it apart. I start the nurse practitioner program in January. I have a dog named Orbit with one ear up and one ear down. The door behind me does not have a lock on the outside. That's enough. That is genuinely enough.